Hey, this is Ragz.
And this is Kirk.
And this is the current podcast, that's CVRNT. Check us out at cvrnt.com.
Okay, since our last podcast, we try to tell our friends and family about the podcast and to check it out. Hopefully, you're liking what we're putting out. It'd be great to hear feedback from you. Reach out to us. We have an email address, cvrntpodcast@gmail.com, and hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. It'd be great if you could help spread the word, and then let us know questions you have, ideas.
All right, so let's get into it, man. You had some interesting experiences over break.
Yeah, so when I went out to Las Vegas to see family, I brought the family down there, and we went to the mall, and I immediately saw this kiosk where anyone could rent out, I think, 15-minute time slots to do a virtual reality experience. But it was a full booth where you could, walk in virtual reality, if you've ever seen those, the technology where, belt straps around your waist and you kind of, walk.
Like the strafe thing.
Yeah, you can, strafe. So it was a Vive setup, but they had, 3 games. So I was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. I went over there with my father-in-law, watched it. How
much were they charging for this?
I think $10 for 15 minutes. And
$10 for 15 minutes?
Yeah, but I think they had a scheme where you could create a card and a player and play and progress through the game if you wanted to book, just come in every weekend or arcade style, right? Okay. But there's no other games. It's just the Vive, and there was 3 or 4 games you could choose from, but there was.
It wasn't open. You can just go to the Steam store and then just.
It was just one of those kiosks in the middle of the aisle, where they're usually selling perfume or whatever. Yeah. And but it was pretty interesting. So so I brought my father-in-law over there, and then what I noticed though is they also sell cardboards, so they can kind of upsell you or say try experience. Go home.
But is it a cardboard with anything special in it, or was it just a cardboard? They were just selling regular cardboards.
Well, they had ones that strapped to your head where they're hands-free and stuff, but they're ones you can get on Amazon.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Because in the Space Needle, you have...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in the Space Needle, they sell cardboards that have a specific experience. You can actually go to the edge of the... So when you go up to Space Needle, there's an area where there's this kind of steel netting or steel mesh where you can't you can't kind of put your hand through or whatever. This thing takes you a level higher.
Oh wow!
And so it's a full-on 360 picture of you standing at the very edge over there and looking over.
Anyway, so we're watching this kid. He's in the experience, and then we just kind of walk away. And for me, I obviously wanted to check this out because I hadn't seen one of these kiosks in person.
In the wild?
In the wild, yeah. I had read about them in, being deployed, being out there in China. Meanwhile, of course, I'm sending Ragz texts madman, telling him hey, look at this thing. But yeah, it was funny. So we leave that area. My wife actually meets back up with us. And then she's like, oh, do you want to check out that, VR thing before we leave the mall? And I was like, no, I already saw it. And then she's like, oh, and so we get in this conversation, and I just tell her, I'm like, yeah, your dad was not impressed.
But did he actually try? He tried the Vive.
No, he just looked. He just stood by me while we were looking at it, right? But this is where it gets good. So I said he was not impressed, and then he just looks at me like, well, what are you talking about? Because we never said anything about it when we were standing in front of the kiosk. And then he just tells me, he's like, I was like, I'm just joking because you didn't say anything, and then he's just like, what does he tell me? He's all, well, I care more about real life than virtual life, right? Which is kind of my point with virtual reality. It's what is it going to take to motivate my grandparents to put on a VR headset? That's where, we're far from it, but early adopters versus
I don't think the grandparents are the problem. I
don't know about problem, but it's I'm just saying there's...
Meaning okay, well, what I'm trying to say...
Hobbyists versus real users, right?
Not even, right? Because what I've noticed is there's an age range to this, and then there's a range of folks... I don't know, my dad's the same way. You mentioned that, I had him try it, and he was like, oh, that's nice, that's cool. Whatevs. It's just cool, whatever. Whereas my mom, she tried it and she was like, this is really cool. She was really enjoying it.
So hold on. I really want to know more about your family because I know you've had them spend more time in it.
Oh, yeah.
But there was one other piece to it.
Yeah.
So one thing that was subtle that I didn't even notice that was great to hear his feedback was he actually was upset about it because he thought that all he saw, all he saw was a kid playing a shooting game and then killing zombies or like shooting people with rifles.
Okay.
And I didn't know this, but he thought that video games might lead to violence, and he thought that all it was just instilling an experience for people to shoot more people. And that was what it got into, actually, a more interesting conversation, because, you know, maybe, you know, you could say that, like, people's first experience with VR, you know, it's like the fact that there are these like first-person shooters, like, you know, that's not for everybody. And so he was he might have been more turned off by VR itself because of the content that he was seeing versus the technology.
Oh, that's quite possible, and that's a very good point that he actually brings up, because
I didn't even think about it though. So I'm sitting here watching this kid play a shooting game.
You're like,
of course, I grew up with that stuff. You know, it's nothing to me.
But that's true, though, because now, in fact, I wonder if it's going to be more or less violence. Because if you think of, like, a PlayStation or something, some game that you're holding controllers for and you're watching on the screen that's going shooting people, do whatever, right? Versus you're in this immersed reality. If you get past the barrier of seemingly real, well, they're not going to look real for a while, right? Like, it's not going to be, like, real people, but you're still, like, someone who's maybe life-sized or, like, you know, bigger there, and feeling seemingly in that space that you're in, and you're shooting them. Then I wonder if people are going to be. It's going to be harder for people to make that move and like kill this other thing or person or whatever, right? As opposed to a video game where you just hit buttons to do stuff. I don't know, and maybe that would potentially eventually you get over that, and then you are desensitized to violence on a much more real level where you're able to pick up something or pick up a gun or pick up some, I don't know. That's a curious thought.
So there's one other item to this, or a point. I kind of started bringing up with him like a few things where it's non-game, or where VR can be used with non-game applications. So I kind of mentioned some stuff about architectural use cases, or like people using it to train for medical purposes. And then it was funny because he immediately goes, see, now that is where I'm excited about technology, you know, solving like real world applications and improving, you know, society and all that. And so we got into this like small conversation though, but he immediately like kind of flipped, and he's like, you know, the technology is interesting there. And that was where I kind of like felt like, man, you know, I know the industry's like, oh, video games, it's where it solves a solution maybe today, or people get engaged with it. But then at the same time, there's like all these other people that might immediately put down the concept. All they're seeing is video games.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's possible, but that's true of anyone in the previous generation, right? Like, if you're talking about like people in their 60s and 70s, maybe even 50s. 55 plus to like 70-ish and so on, people probably look at video games or video game consoles as a waste of time. Chances are, like, I don't know, my parents always, you know, even to date, well,
it's kind of true, but
again, so people your age,
for everyone online, I'm about 92.
No, I mean it's fair. It is kind of a waste of time, I guess. But at the same time, I think there's a difference between looking at something. I think VR may kind of benefit in that sense, because you can definitely present it as a non-video game or game-playing platform, whereas something like a PlayStation or something, you put a controller in someone's hands and then you tell them to go around and do stuff. I mean, it's one thing for the game to just be on screen, and then they're just like, well, what am I playing this game for on screen? Like, it makes no sense. I would like when you put this VR headset on, you give them this whole experience, and when you give them this immersive experience, I feel like they're gonna have. It gives VR an upside because it lets them know, okay, this is not just for games; it's for other stuff too. I totally understand your father-in-law's like initial reaction where he was just like, oh, it's just, you know, it's for these kids who are picking up these guns and like shooting, and there's this game, and that's all it is. So I'll go into some of the stuff with like my family, right? So my parents are like, my dad's about 70, my mom's like 65. They, you know, they're kind of tech savvy. They're pretty tech savvy for their age, actually, and I don't know if that's an ageist thing to say. But no, given the fact that my dad's an instrumentation engineer and my mom's, you know, she's got a master's in chemistry. They're generally more or less tech savvy. They're on their phones a lot. They're online a lot. Things. So my dad was not impressed with VR, but he thought it was interesting for sure. And so I did explain some of the same stuff as well, where I was like, because he used to work on these turbines back in the Middle East on just actual turbines and stuff in the pipelines, oil fields. So I was kind of explaining to him that some of the ways Boeing, for example, is using this on their factory floor, or some of these other bigger companies, like Ford is using it. And so that kind of piqued his interest a little bit more, where he was able to kind of come to terms with what this technology could be used for other than just games. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of a normal place to be in, where they're like, oh, well, if you're going to use it for other stuff, not just games, then sure, maybe it makes sense. My mom, she loved it. My aunt, who's around 60, she loved it too.
So that's what I was going to ask you, was like, what experiences are your family seeing? Like, I didn't even know your aunt was out here. Or
she was. I mean, I've had a lot of family and friends like pass through the last few months since we had the baby, and so every time someone swung through, I've always kind of just thrown it out there. Hey, I have this Vive. I have, I'm into VR stuff. Do you guys want to try it? Have you tried it?
Like, what is that? And you're like, just put it on your face.
Yeah. So a lot of times it's like, no, I don't really know, or whatever.
No.
Or I haven't heard of it, and so generally someone's willing to try it, and then someone tries it, and then somebody else is like, oh, and once the first person tries it, they're usually like, oh, you really need to try this out. This is really cool. And it's just a guy, who tries it, and then they make their significant other try it out or whatever. My uncle tried it. He was kind of like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then my aunt tried it, and she was just on it for a good half hour. Oh, wow. She loved going around dropping those spells into those things, and she had a great time. Like, every time she looked around, and she was in one of those things where there was a bridge, and so she looked down, and she was like, oh, that's crazy. And so I think the one trend that I'm starting to see is people who are more visual in general, who work visually, right? Like where drawing on the board. I think it's about
60% of people.
So people who like drawing on the board, for example, to go solve problems, things like that, they seem to kind of just jump in immediately and understand that aspect of being in this shared, almost immersed environment. Whereas others kind of just, as of now at least, they don't see the general...
They think too much into it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people just do think a lot about VR in that sense, where they're just like, oh, I don't know, it's like, what's the point? Like, that's cool, but, this isn't really practical, or this isn't really good. Yeah. So
they start judging it before they even try it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. But, I mean...
Actually, I forgot to tell you. So, at the fashion show mall is where I saw the kiosk. Uh-huh. But then we went to these outlet malls, and I saw 2 kiosks walking around the mall. It was just like, they strapped this VR headset, and at this point, I think it's a cardboard headset. I don't even remember. But these people are like on a platform that they held their hands on these like bars, and the platform just kind of like jiggles, and then they like see this VR experience, and they still charge like $10 for the experience, and it's more of like a novelty. It's like, hey, step on this platform, and this like floor is going to shake from underneath you while you're like rumbling through a forest or whatever. And I was just like a little saddened, but at the same time, at the same outlet, this cell phone screen repair kiosks that you see everywhere, they sold cardboards. So everybody, it was like the whole Christmas season, anybody who knew somebody they could get a cardboard from was selling them. And when I say cardboard, again, I mean like any of these knockoff brands that have a strap, and it's not just like
Google cardboard. It could just be
any headset that's not like a real Vive, an Oculus, a Gear, a Daydream.
That's not a real headset, quote unquote.
True.
You're right. Is Daydream considered a real headset?
Yeah, good point. I guess not real headset.
Well,
but
even
what I mean
Gear
is,
for that matter.
Yeah. I guess what I mean is like, nobody's building apps for that platform.
Yeah. I get what you... No, I was being,
being you.
Whatever, yes. Yeah. I was being a phallus.
But yeah, so it was just funny because I was like, man, well, so my point though is like, all I read about is like how in Japan or China, there's all these like internet cafes and like, there's brands that are setting up kiosks in malls. I hadn't seen that here in Seattle. And I started pinging the Seattle folks, and some people reached out and they're like, hey, we ran some numbers trying to set up an arcade, but the numbers didn't work out. And it was interesting, though, that when I went to Vegas, boom, there's all these people. I mean, maybe it's just Vegas, a place there's enough traffic.
Yeah, because you can't consider... So the problem with Seattle is that you have people in the tech industry who are plugged in, who, if they want to go buy Vive, they could generally afford to go buy a Vive. If you have someone who is not in the tech industry, things like the cardboard, things like, so I don't know if I'd consider my wife a typical, non-tech person. She's a tax attorney, but she subscribes to GeekWire just to keep up on tech news. Hopefully there are other people out there who do the same thing who are not in tech, because, it's just a good avenue to go and read up about stuff. But she gets a pretty good idea of how, what's going on just around stuff just from subscribing to one mail list. I think Seattle always has a bigger kind of chasm between non-tech and tech, where somewhere like Vegas, where people are there anyway in this place that's, it's very touristy. You have people from all over the world come through. You have people who are more willing to do things that they would not otherwise do because they feel like it's Vegas.
Because you're drunk?
No, yeah. Partly that, and partly because
we're at the mall.
Well, no, it doesn't matter, right? You're in Vegas. You're drunk all the time. It's just, unless you live there, which, it was different. Yeah. But otherwise, if you have tourists or whatever, it's just another little, way to bait people to come in and spend some money, even if you get $10-$20. I mean, think about it, right? A Vive right now with an actual machine that can run the Vive is about $1,000-$1,200 something. $10 a pop, you just need 120 people to come through to pay for it. And anything on top of that is just, is excess. 120 people easy, you're going to get it as long as you're some of the first few. So I think that's probably what they were thinking.
All right, so actually I was interested in you showing your family Google VR.
Yes.
That's what they call it.
Yeah, Google VR, Google Earth VR?
Google Earth, yes.
Is that what it...
Over the holidays, basically, Ragz had mentioned that he showed his parents Google
Yeah,
Earth.
It was like one of the... I've sent all of 10 tweets in my life, and that was... I sent 3 tweets all about this, so it's a large percentage of my tweets. It's like 30% of all the tweets I've ever sent in my life are about Google Earth VR. No, it was a fun experience. When I first told my parents about it, again, my mom was kind of more willing and excited to try it. My dad, I don't think, ended up trying it, but my mom did. And so what we did was she put it on immediately, and the first thing we did was, my parents live in India, so we tried to find our house in India. And then so I'd grown up in the Middle East, and so my parents spent a lot of time there. And so we went to check our house out in Qatar. And so in most places that are not larger European cities or American cities, the Google Earth VR experience is, to a certain point, it's okay, but it's not 3D. So, when you go through, it's fine. You can see things, you can see the maps, and you're kind of there hovering around and looking around 360, which is cool, but it's not like you don't actually see the building. So we checked out these spots, and then we went to...
Sorry, clarifying question. So you're saying it's more like seeing a 360 video, like where there's no depth really to
it's flat. It's all flat files. So It's essentially, if you can imagine, it's basically whatever satellite image they can get, as opposed to having, the Google cars or whoever it is, walk through or drive through and have a 360 camera strapped to the whatever it is and on the move, and then it's actually recording everything, so you actually get depth up and down. So it's all essentially just flat images from satellite. Mm-hmm. So you kind of, you're there and you can see the shapes of the houses around or whatever, but it's all just flat. Whereas, so my mom wanted to quote unquote go to Venice, and so because we'd been to Venice a few years ago, so she went in and she was able to move through, and it was really cool because in Venice it's all 3D. Tokyo we went to check out Tokyo. Tokyo is one of the demo cities, I guess they have, but if you go to Tokyo or SF or even Seattle, in fact Seattle, I was able to come out and see the Expedia building in downtown Bellevue and hang out in front of float in front of it using Google Earth. It was really cool. It's just it's a fun thing to go check out some stuff. It'll definitely give you a much better idea of, I don't know, I've used Google Earth and Google Maps and stuff to try to gauge distance between a hotel or some booking I've had in some place.
Booking.
A booking. And
sorry, side joke. Insider
but
joke.
but you know, like it's given me some idea. It'd be like 5 minutes to go from here to here, and you can kind of like do the street view walk. But using Google Earth, it was just like, I don't know, you could just kind of fly through and like check out, and you could be like, you could kind of look at it from a level above and be like, oh yeah, the hotel's right there. I just need to go down the street and go around, and this thing is close or this thing is not. And in fact, when we did the Venice experience, you could go underneath these bridges and you could see gondolas on the thing. And I thought it was really cool. My mom was pretty impressed by it. She liked that a lot. So I thought it was super stellar. So it was a fun experience. I still think I get a lot of believers. I've been working on my friends for a while, and you know, it's the same thing for them. It was different. The difference between my family and my friends is my friends have at least played video games and stuff, so they're not opposed to the idea of it being a gaming system, but they are definitely more impressed by it once they realize it's fully immersive. I did have a friend of mine, and I actually have a recording with the Theta S, who.
Oh, we gotta put it online.
Oh, dude,
come on.
He might not be.
I already
happy.
Can tell.
But he was trying the blue experience. The ocean thing, right?
So yeah, for those that don't know, you start off in this experience where you're like on a deck of a ship, and
kind of depending on the experience.
Yeah, there's like 3 options,
yeah,
but one of them is
you're underwater essentially.
You're underwater, and you can kind of see all these like fish and whales and stuff. It's pretty good. Actually, what I like about demoing that one, and I took this from someone else. There's really no use to the controllers, but you can walk around, so it's very natural. You can just basically walk around and look.
Yeah, it's
like being in a museum.
So I actually demoed that to a couple of one of our like distant cousins' kids, and he was pretty young. His dad was okay with him trying it. It was like 8 and 9. And when he tried it, he was just really kind of amazed by like the whole kind of being down. Actually, that's another that's something I wanted to bring up, because so they were probably the youngest members of our family who tried. It was one of them who was 8, and his brother was about 15, I think, or he was 9 and 16, something like that. The older guy who does play a lot of Xbox, who, plays video games and stuff, he was like, oh, that's cool. VR is nice. But the younger kid was far more impressed by all of it. I mean, sure, it's kind of a little easier to impress younger kids. I don't know what that says, but maybe the older guy just wasn't.
Regardless of what it says, it's amazing watching a little kid. Like,
oh, man. He was so. In fact,
so
at the end of the day, he said, this is what he said. He said,
it sucks about being an adult. Like, sometimes you're just like so jaded about the world.
No, seriously, because he tried out and he was like, oh my god, that's so amazing. He was like, I didn't even think that I would get to try VR today, and I wouldn't get to try any of this stuff, but it was so cool, and he was so excited. I was like, yeah, dog, I feel you. I feel you. I'm only like 27 years older than you, but it's cool. I feel you on that same way. So it's kind of slightly depressing. But,
so you're saying the blue, though.
The blue. So anyway, back to the blue.
Go to your buddy.
My boy, when he for some reason started getting down on his hands and knees. I guess he was trying to look underneath some of the flowers. But because it's a 360 video, it's the most amusing thing. He just slowly keeps dropping down, and then just hands are on the floor. He's looking up, and he's just looking so funny. I might have to put a clip of this up online now.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, I'll make sure his face is covered.
Again, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Tell Ragz you want to see those videos.
Anyway, but what I did want to touch back on what we were talking about earlier about the the kiosks and all these other experiences that are coming out. Actually, if you're in the Seattle area, if you have access to vehicle, obviously, because it's a little further from Seattle, the city, there's mukleshoot Casino, and they actually seem to have paired up with VRcade. We talked about this, not the last episode, maybe episode 3 maybe, where we talked about the Immerse Summit, where we tried this out. And so for just a quick recap, essentially VRcade, they set up these arcade-type experiences, much larger space. Typically with the Vive or Oculus, you're tethered. VRcade has basically built
a proprietary system
where you can have these controllers and basically play multiplayer games within the space, and they're willing to come set it up for you if you're a casino, and and you can get people. So me and Kirk have been trying to kick around the idea of trying to go check it out. We have 2 young children. We have a lot of work in general outside of other stuff and VR. So I don't know when we'll get the chance, but I'm hoping in the next month or 2 we can somehow make a quick visit over there to check it out and give you guys a first-hand deal. But the point is, we have a lot of these arcade-style experiences pop up, and we just kind of touched upon some of the good and bad about it a little bit. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so actually it's kind of an interest of mine is that I've been reading again about China having all of these locations, especially a lot of malls, internet cafes. And actually, somebody brought up a good point. Maybe in America, people are used to having more wider open space, but in maybe China where people might have a smaller house or a smaller location, VR kind of unlocks the potential to have as large of a space as you need.
Did you... I don't know if you forwarded an article to me sometime, I would say last year.
2016 last year.
2016 last year.
Like 3 weeks ago?
3 weeks ago. No, it was more like October, November, I think. Or I don't know if we just independently read it or if it was on GeekWire. But apparently they're trying to sell these kind of small, really tiny studio apartments.
Yeah.
With just a
we have them in Seattle. In San Francisco, and I left San Francisco.
Or was it a hotel room that we saw that you could put on? There were hotel rooms. I think it was the same article that I mentioned, or separately. I don't know. We're probably merging a few things together, but so there's a few key things here.
We definitely know. Sorry, in San Francisco, they were selling apartments that were the size of a car, so square footage, a car,
really
small car, yes. But they have them in Seattle now. Because
the pods and stuff.
Yeah, land is so valuable, and I think this is like common. This is commonplace outside of America. It's just that we're not used to it. So at a hotel, I think you were alluding to, they were saying, "Hey, come here. Who cares what it looks like inside or outside the window?" Yeah,
just you can sit in, and there was I think if I remember right, there was just a VR headset in the middle, and so you could put it on and you could kind of have whatever experiences, but. There were also these apartments in China, I believe, or Hong Kong maybe, that had, and we'll try to find the link and post that up, but that had just a VR headset in the middle, this really tiny spot, and essentially gave you the impression that you were in a bigger area or whatnot, right? So I don't know. I think eventually you're going to see more people starting to do that. The question that we'll have to see if it gets answered is, if you're in that kind of situation, and if you have a small spot like that, if you put a VR headset on for a few hours when you come home, even though you can't walk around, does it still psychologically affect you in a positive manner, enough so that you're willing to forego the actual idea of space? And because your mind thinks there's all the space and you don't walk around or whatever, but if you really think about it, you're on your couch at home, or you're watching TV after you go home from work, or you're finishing dinner, then you watch something on TV, and then you walk over to your bedroom and you sleep, and let's say you work. If you work...
Life sounds very depressing.
For a large portion of the population, it is, right? Like you go to work, you come home, and then you go to bed and get up.
We kind of talked about it, though, in the past, like these gray boxes, and we just like, what's the future, right? And anyway... One
Black
thing I
Mirror,
Black
episode
Mirror. I
2.
still have not watched it.
Episode 2.
Okay.
Talks about this a little bit.
I was going to try and watch it over break. Yeah, we all need to watch it. But so again, I'd been reading about all these places in China, and I haven't talked to anybody in China that's like kind of using these like locations to try out headsets. But I did talk to a guy who's out in, I think, like Eastern Canada. And he mentioned, like, their local internet cafe had 2 Vives. And I'm like, not 1, but 2.
And this was... where was this?
What? So
Eastern, when you say Eastern Canada, like where? Like around...
I want to say...
like
Calgary or
right outside
north of Toronto. I don't know. I think he lives somewhere out. Justin Jackson is his name. He's big on the internet. Like, he's definitely a marketing product manager guy. So we've conversed a little bit, and I was offering to give him a demo of the Vive, and he was telling me that his son actually was like, "Dad, let's go try this." And that was kind of cool to me because my kid's 1. It's just like I can only think about the future of like when the kid's like dragging you. I mean, I know some parents get exhausted by it, but as a young parent, it's amazing thinking of that concept of the future. But yeah, so here's somebody in like outside of a major town, and their local internet cafe has these Vives. You hear about in Europe, there's arcades setting up. In Viveland. So that was one thing that. I kind of stumbled upon this like through kind of hearing about, first seeing it at Vegas. It all started with this experience at Vegas, but then seeing all these other, think about China and then like Canada and anyway Viveland. So HTC is like trying to set up these arcades where people can go in and try out the VR experience, and then possibly the arcade can kind of manage getting users like to purchase through, but to try out their experiences. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of interesting that the sense that they have like some of the Vivelands have these like I don't know what you call it, scenarios set up where it's like you're in this like war zone. There's like in physical world, or real life. What do they call it? In real life.
Oh, so
there's like sandbags and stuff that like create the perimeter, and then
so kind of like I don't know if anyone's actually heard about something called the Void. So the Void that they're setting up in
we should make
Utah.
a trip to that.
Yeah, so it's actually Salt Lake City, Utah, I think,
and New York.
Oh, they did have one set up in New York, but this
Ghostbusters experience.
Oh, really? Okay, so but the one here, the Void, the idea there was that you would wear an immersive headset and then basically think of something like Half-Life or Halo or something, and they actually build it out in a big warehouse where they have like these kind of open pipes and stuff in real life, but you interact with the same thing in the game, and so it makes it feel like it's a physical world thing. So I would say kind of think augmented reality, kind of some of the stuff that was Dr. Michael Gourlay was going on over one of the Eastside VR meetup things, where he talked about overlaying, in augmented reality, when you wear augmented reality lenses or whatever, what you want to do from a developer standpoint is consider the whole world as digital as opposed to physical. And that way you can make things interact in a more natural way. So the idea being you wear a headset and you see a table, you don't treat the table as some separate entity, like a real entity, versus you want a ball bouncing on a table. You treat the table and the ball as a virtual entity. And so that way they clash in a more natural way.
Yeah, so I actually know a lot kind of about the Void, and they kind of do the opposite. It's like instead of being an augmented reality,
right,
you're in a VR headset, but they recognize, actually, apparently like one of the guy's dads or whatever was like a set designer in Hollywood.
Yeah, so if you can imagine, it's pushing that theory a little further, where now you wear an immersive headset, and it's immersive, and that you're wearing this thing on, it's virtual. So seemingly, if I sat here in Seattle and put that on, I could probably have the Void quote-unquote experience. But in the Void, like you touch a pipe that's open down there, it's just there because they've built the quote-unquote set for the whole thing. Yep. Yep. And so that's kind of becoming just a new kind of way where people can interact with an immersed reality kind of thing. And I think that actually makes more sense in the long term to think about a transitionary phase kind of, where now as human beings, as we look around and walk places and we look at stuff, we generally want to touch things and we want to look at things, whatever, and you put a headset on and you're like, oh yeah, I know this thing is there, I could pick it up, clicking this button on the Vive and doing whatever. But if you're in this space and you're wearing this headset and now the Vive going wireless with the battery for a little while, etc., you can put this on, you can go out and you can actually feel these things, so much so that if you can actually feel some of the more inane things, it might make you feel more like you're in a more immersive space. Like, let's say there's a rock on the ground and you actually hit your leg against it, or you're able to pick it up and throw it in, like, with your hands, as opposed to the VR version of it, or even with haptic feedback and whatnot. Now your mind just ends up thinking, oh yeah, more and more of this stuff is real, so I should go around this puddle of water because I don't know if it's real or fake. And so you start like reconciling less with that, and then just kind of going more with like, this is just all real, until you take the headset off eventually, I guess. But I find it curious that these things are popping up. I think it would be great if our listeners could come back, or if somebody could come back and be like, oh yeah, I tried this one thing and it was cool or not cool. Like, we'd love to have you talk to us about your experiences. But I think Kirk and I, we're going to try at some point to try and make some of these.
Okay, neither of us have ever paid for a VR experience, so I'm kind of curious what other people's experience have been. Have they tried the Void? Have they, been in a small arcade? I'm interested, like, on how immersive they felt the experience was.
Yeah, maybe our next step is to take our big-ass microphone plug it into a laptop, bring it to one of these spots, try it out, and then ask people in person. That might be...
I'm down for that.
I'm sure you are. But if it's in a casino, well, hell, I guess we're just going to have to hang out there for a little while, I guess.
Mukleshoot.
At Mukleshoot Casino. Yeah, I know, neither have I, but it's supposed to be pretty fun.
Yeah.
It's one of the first smokeless casinos in the country.
Oh, I'm down then.
Yeah. Anyway, so I guess with that we'll kind of close this one out. I think a lot of good things in store for this year. I don't know. Maybe we should do a quick predictions thing next episode or something.
Next episode?
Yeah.
All right. What are you predicting?
I'm predicting
that there's another episode.
I'm predicting that there's another episode at this point. Is all I'm predicting.
Yeah. We need to get somebody online here in the interview. We need to get an interview going.
Yeah, we probably should do that. Yeah. And
reach out to us if you want us to interview you.
Yeah, I mean,
we could pick your brain.
If you're one of the 5 people around the world listening to this podcast, you're a shoo-in for an interview. Just because. So
we're huge as a podcast, so let us know.
We are huge.
Oh, he's got a better accent.
Yes, the huge.
So reach out to us if you want us to interview you.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, all right, so we'll close this one out. Again, this is Ragz.
This is Kirk.
And this is the current podcast, cvrnt.com. We got the Twitter info out there. It's on the page, at the VRPM, at Brown Channel, that's BRWNCHNL, at CVRNT. Hit us up.
Yep.
Email
One other
us.
thing, email us at cvrntpodcast@gmail.com.
Yep.
Ping us. Send us emails. Let us know what you're into, what you want us to talk about.
I know, right?
Questions.
And it's
everything.
It's not
Photos.
It's not that we're running out of things to talk. We can talk about stuff all the time. It's just talking about interesting things that becomes a little challenging after a while.
No, we just want to hear from you, though. I think we want more engagement.
No, we do. Yeah. Even if it's a couple people, and if you reach out to us, we swear we're not going to get overexcited the fact that someone's listening to our podcast and like coming back to us.
I think you can already tell. We're like just off that energy.
Please, just really holla at us. Just holla at us. Just let us know what's up. Just come back to us, please.
Okay.
Please. All right.
Predictions. We never talked about predictions.
We're predict that there's another episode. That's all we're predicting.
I eventually want to talk about like my time in VR chat.
Kirk's time in VR chat. We will leave it at that for now because we want to wait for the next episode and give you guys a...
It's creepy.
Let's
start with that.
But we'll wait a couple weeks and figure out just how creepy that is. Okay. All right. Anyway. All right. Thank you guys for listening, and we are out.
See you later.